Waiting is hard. We are terrible at waiting. And by we, I mean me, but I also mean you. I recently did a very limited study that indicated that we begin to grow uncomfortable at about 24 to 26 seconds of silence when we expect someone to be speaking. Our minds start to race with questions. Why isn't Elle speaking yet? Is there something wrong with the sound system? Did she choose yet another microphone with dead batteries today? By about 30 seconds, we get really worried. Did Elle forget what she was going to say? Did she forget to write a sermon altogether? You should be so lucky, but no. Did she drop the note cards for her sermon twice before the service began? That really happened. If I had allowed the silence to stretch for 45 seconds, chances are excellent that someone from the pews would have spoke out. What is going on here? That's just how concerned we are about constantly having some sort of noise running in the backgrounds of our lives. Well, today is the last Sunday of Ordinary Days. It also happens to be Christ the King Sunday, and we're going to begin celebrating Advent. It's a liturgical nightmare, but it's so fun. Advent is at its best a wonderful, terrifying, shockingly disruptive pause to our ordinary lives. In fact, we are tempted to rush ahead to Christmas, perhaps a little too quickly, probably because we have made the Christmas narrative so beautiful and comfortable and fun, and we love the part when we rejoice. I mean, I do. But humor me for just a moment, and let's take a step back, because in many ways, these days leading up to Christmas are a terrible mess. And it is often in our terrible messes that we find Jesus. Perhaps no one has ever understood this better than Mary. We have no definitive evidence of how old Mary was when Jesus was conceived. But if we make an educated guess based on the Jewish customs of the time, she was probably a teenager, 13, 15, maybe 17, but that's a stretch. The artist, whose work we'll be enjoying throughout the series, depicts her as one of many people in this community. And in fact, it's hard to find her. I thought, do we have a slide with the artwork? There it is. This community in which Mary is a part is alive and active. It's busy. It's difficult to find her, and it reminds me a little bit of a Where's Waldo book. I can't help but think of all the other people in this picture who could be more easily found, who might be found first, who might be better suited to carry and birth and raise God incarnate than a teenager. Yet tucked away in a busy corner, way down in the corner, we find Mary, and she's feeding chickens. Perhaps she's longing for the day when she will be grown up, because she is not grown up. Perhaps she's longing for the day when she will be married to Joseph the carpenter. There's probably quite an age gap there, and it's a process for them to go from betrothed to married. Perhaps she's longing for the day when she will get on with her ordinary life. If you remember being a teenager, you probably also remember the feeling of wishing you could just grow up already. I mean, after all, adults can do whatever they want, right? But there is no way in these whimsical longings for adulthood that a teenage girl ever hopes to herself, maybe an angel will appear to me and announce the Immaculate Conception, speeding the process along a bit. There's just no way. Yet in this case, the angel does appear and says, "Greetings, favored one, the Lord is with you." I really love Mary's reaction. First, she is much perplexed. The original Greek here translates to something closer to greatly agitated, wholly disturbed, alarmed, and troubled. Now, ordinarily, when we read that Mary was much perplexed, I think we have this tendency to imagine her kind of tilting her head to the side and pausing briefly to wonder, But let me tell you, if Mary was really out somewhere feeding chickens when the angel appeared, it would have been more like chicken feed everywhere, red flags waving. Who are you? Why are you speaking to me? And what kind of danger am I in? That would have been what much perplexed looked like. That's the first part. But then she ponders. In this case, that means that she begins to consider what might be happening here. More than anything, she's probably reasoning with herself. And in fact, in another version, we can read that Mary kept pondering, which seems to indicate that this process took longer than a moment or two. So here's where we're at so far. Mary is feeding the chickens. Here comes the angel. Bam, big reaction. And then she takes a step back to go over it. The angel hasn't really said anything yet. And already she's processing the enormous change that is happening in her life before she even knows what it might be. Now, I don't know how it works for you, but if something particularly out of the ordinary happens in my life, whether it's a catastrophe or a smashing success, I have to run the scenario a few 100 times to make sense of it. I think that might be what Mary is doing here. And I think she's still going over it as the angel continues to speak. And I think she's still going over it as the entire nativity narrative unfolds. Because when we get all the way to Jesus' birth, spoiler alert, that's coming, she's still pondering. Even 9 months later, she's still trying to work all of this together in her mind and in her heart. And it's really hard because none of this actually comes together quite right. That's because love is risky and it's painful and it doesn't make sense, yet somehow Mary believes it's worth it. So that's what I think Mary's thinking. And then the angel, who in my version of this story has been waiting silently for much longer than is comfortable, says, "Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God," which is pretty much a repeat of what the angel just said. So maybe he's processing too. This is, after all, very unusual. And then he tells her about Jesus. Now, here's the real kicker. Mary does not run screaming. And I've got to tell you, I think she could have. That's part of the risk love takes, and God doesn't force this on her. Instead, this is one of the most tangible moments in all of history when humanity chooses to partner with God in creation. This is part of the ongoing story of God where things are always echoing other things. It's why the artist chose to depict Mary in clothes that are marked by the tree of life, calling forth the story of creation as the Word becomes flesh, a new creation. And so I think something happens in Mary as she's thinking through the choice set before her. I think she remembers. I think she remembers the scriptures and the prophecies and the way of the coming Messiah. And she too wants to be a part of the redemption of the world, however disruptive it might be. So she says yes. Mary asks a question, and I think we have to listen very carefully to the simplicity of it because we take a lot of liberty with the interpretation. But not that many words are actually spoken. And that's important because just verses before, Zechariah asks something that looks similar to us, but it's not. Zechariah asks, "How can I believe this?" And Gabriel responds with, "Since you didn't believe me, how about you just stay silent for a while?" But Mary just asks, "How?" And we know this is fairly accurate because of Gabriel's response to her. He's not trying to convince her. There's no need. He just tells her exactly how the conception of Christ will come to be. Mary's how is not tied to a lack of belief, but to further pondering. She's ready to say yes. She'd like some details. I think that's fair, and apparently so does Gabriel. Admittedly, this all does sound a little impossible. I have some empathy for mute Zechariah. Even as the angel declares, nothing will be impossible with God. And I'm actually quite fond of the NIV, which reads instead, "For no word from God will ever fail." I think it moves this statement from something magical to something covenantal. Surely what is happening here is miraculous beyond human comprehension. Surely these words from God spoken into Mary's life by the angel Gabriel will come to pass. But more than that, the Word of God, Jesus, will never fail. Good questions are essential. What questions are we asking that bring about answers that provide instruction for our next move as opposed to discipline for our lack of belief? Ponder that. Advent is a time for reflection and anticipation. So ponder that deeply, maybe in a circular way as opposed to a linear one. Take all of the pieces, take all of the impossibilities, mixed together with all of the possibilities, put them together and take them apart, arrange them and rearrange them, and consider how they might come together as part of the fulfillment of the promise of what it is for us to be and to become the people of God. Redemption does not come easy. Not ours, and certainly not that of the other. I get that sometimes it's too much, friends. At least sometimes I feel like it's too much for me. But then we can look to Mary. Mary, the teenager, feeding her chickens in the busy community, surrounded by people who are older and wiser and more prepared, stops and says, "Here am I, the servant of the Lord. Let it be with me according to your word." And the angel departs. And she's alone again. Yet, she's never alone again. Because this is the story of presence. And Mary waits.